I might be able to sell it to you for a dear price.
We are online.
I might pay money for that stuff.
I'm joking, Nick. Don't worry.
Are we?
Okay, we are live on YouTube.
Ooh.
Okay. Make a host.
Power.
You're a host now. Now you need to admit people.
Is there still a waiting room?
Yeah. So on the participant list on the top, there is the waiting room and you can admit all.
Okay. So there are 4. We can start. Yeah, it's actually time. Like, admit all. There's 16 people in there.
I'm not sure if there is an option to, just enable people to join now, or if you have to pay attention to the waiting room.
I think I'll have to admit everyone. Hi everyone. I'm already going to post the shared Miro board in the chat. It has anonymous mode enabled, so you can open it in the browser. If you want to open it in your app, one of the tricks is to star it, and then it will show up in your start, and then you will be able to open it easily from your app locally. All right. Okay, you should have the power to unmute yourself if needed. I would appreciate a test run. Can someone try to unmute themselves and speak?
Test.
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi.
Hi.
Testing.
Okay. Last time we had a bit of trouble with unmuting everyone. Okay, we'll give it a couple of more minutes. Before we kick this off. Does anyone know if the chat has backwards history for the people that join later?
Sure.
Yeah.
As last time, the link was in the chat, but still somebody asked to post it again. So I think it's not. That doesn't have a history.
It's not. I'm just gonna randomly.
I don't know.
Like it's another. Kind of. I'm gonna post it again. Sorry for the people who keep, having this message. So Nick, how long do you normally wait before starting?
So you know have the answer. No chat
Yeah.
history.
We normally get people coming in up to even half an hour through the session. So I think it's okay to wait 5 or 10 minutes. Yeah, normally between 5 and 10 minutes is good.
Okay, more people are. Showing up. Look at that, speaker's view is really starting to become like a cool grid. 30 people scaling into it. So I'm going to post the link again for the people that just joined, because there is still no chat history. And welcome everyone. All right, some warm-up questions maybe, just to get a feel of the room. If you go to the participants tab, you can raise your hand. You can raise your hand normally. So who is interested, like who came, because, you know, they already introduced DDD and they, you know, had some hurdles to cross, and they would love to share their advice. If you could like raise your hand, that would be cool.
With cameras.
All right. All right, I think we'll start now. I'll leave this open so I can see. So I'm going to post the link one last time. Okay, there's someone in the waiting room now. Okay, so there's a link to the Miro board. You can open it in the browser. It has anonymous access. If you want to open it in your app, then you can star it and open your app. And then if you go to the start, you will easily find the board. That seems to be the only way to open an anonymous link very quickly. You can unmute yourself to talk. So if you have any questions, you can ask them if something is not clear. You can also use the chat. If you don't feel comfortable using the mic, you can also use the chat in order to do that. All right. So welcome everyone. And I'm also checking the waiting room in the meantime. Does everyone have the link to Miro now? Everyone on the Miro board? All right, I can see. If you don't feel like participating but just want to observe, that's also okay. All right. So what we have planned for tonight is to sort of, we're going to try to create a DDD Newcomers playbook, which is a very, fancy way of saying that a lot of people, when they first encounter DDD, are very excited about it, and they sort of, want to introduce it into the company, but they're not sure how to do that. And what we would end up with tonight is basically an overview of all the challenges that a person can have when trying to introduce it, and some do's and don'ts on how to deal with those challenges. So that would be the end result of this evening. And then we will, pour it into a readable format, and we'll put it in the repository in one of the repositories of the DDD crew GitHub account to share with everyone, and to keep on building upon. So this is basically the initial setup for that. Is that clear for everyone so far? All right. I will try to summon. Yeah, I'm going to activate all the arrows. So basically, the first exercise is about thinking of the people who would want to give the advice, and thinking of the people who would be, receiving the introduction into domain-driven design. So basically, for example, you have one software developer, and they might want to introduce it to half of the team. Like, that is one sort of connection that you have. The thing is that domain-driven design is not only for software developers. There are many people in the company that could be interested in, and I think it will be very useful in order to think about challenges, to actually think about the people who might want to introduce it, and the people that they will introduce it to. So for the first exercise, we'll have like 5 minutes of just doing a sort of brain dump on the Post-its, where everyone just individually adds the people that they can think of that will want to introduce DDD, or the groups that would want to introduce DDD into the company, and anyone that will be on the receiving end of that introduction. So it's just a 5-minute exercise individually. Are there any questions about that? And if not, then go. I'll set the timer.
You mean all of us at the board? Give around at the board. Same board.
Yeah, so activity 1, this is the solo exercise, but you can all add it in the same board.
Cool.
And it doesn't really matter if you have a couple of duplicates on there. That's a sort of a warm-up exercise to get everyone going. I'm going to post. Oh, I'm sorry. This chat is confusing. I'm going to post the board one last time because I admitted a couple of more people.
Wow. Someone says we have to convince the legal department to do DDD. I'm looking forward to talking about this later. There's a story behind that one for sure.
This is the question. Should we write who want to present or who want to convince?
Well, I guess who do you need to convince? Like who can stop you from doing DDD?
Okay.
Or who can be an ally, who can help you to introduce DDD if you get them on your side. So maybe someone who doesn't have authority, but if you can start building, an alliance of people who are interested in thinking about the design of software and getting into the domain more. Yeah, and you can either get authority by convincing the leadership, or you can get authority by numbers. Or you can get authority by drinking Yorkshire tea. If that's an in-joke, you won't get that.
Always. You can always get authority by drinking Yorkshire tea. This is said. We don't need to discuss about it.
Turns out I was muted. I'm also very interested in the person that keeps adding tribe in front of their proposals, because I also find that interesting.
That's me.
Hello, Sophie. So why do you say tribe? Like tribe lead, tribe product owner? So what's the story behind using that word?
So for in the context that I work, if you are specifically for the tribe, so tribe lead or tribe product owner, then you're more senior than, say, the product owner, who would be at squad level.
Yeah, so tribe is basically a bit of a team structure that you have in the company?
Yeah, so tribe is could cover like 8 different teams, for example.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's interesting. I haven't heard that one before. Thanks for sharing.
Isn't it the Spotify model, the so-called Spotify model?
Yeah.
Are we playing the Spotify model drinking game tonight, or?
Which is that?
Are you going to post tequila pictures on the board or something?
Oh, there's an idea.
Yeah.
So the Spotify model drinking game is when someone says squads or tribes or Spotify model, you have to take a very strong drink.
Yeah.
Oh.
I feel attacked.
It's just a joke because the Spotify model became very popular and lots of companies started using it, and suddenly everyone's talking about the Spotify model all the time.
And then it became very unpopular because they just get this model and put it in that company if it's fit or not.
Okay. So we have a lot of things on the board of people who might want to introduce DDD and who might, be on the receiving end of that introduction. And there are very, straightforward ones that we can all think of. An interesting one is someone put mentor. I'm not sure who was that. Do you have a story to share on mentor trying to introduce something to you, or you were the mentor and you tried to introduce something? I don't know who put that up. You can unmute yourself. If you don't want to talk, that's also okay.
Yeah, that was me.
Hi, Dave.
Hi. Yeah, so I've done mentoring with a bunch of startups, and so I've tried on occasions to introduce ideas like DDD into startups, and that's proved tricky.
All right. Your sound is a bit off. I don't know if anyone else had that problem.
Yeah, I think we
Yeah, it
lost.
was a bit muffled.
Okay.
Hello, can you hear me?
Sometimes.
Okay.
Can you tell me, why did we do this activity? What was the purpose of this activity?
All right.
Convince me I didn't waste 5 minutes just now. Sell me something I've already bought from you.
Nick, if I have to sell you, I better just end the meeting. No. So basically, the reasoning behind this exercise was that like a very common mistake that I have been making for really like 15 years, and I still do it once in a while, is that I try to introduce the wrong people to the concept. I also sort of try to force it upon them. Like I say, this is cool, and now you have to listen to me. So basically what you have is that you have circles of influence in any situation that you're in, not just in your organization. And what you have to do is that you have to start with the closest circle, right? So the people that you have direct influence over, which are your teammates, your team members, you know, a colleague you have a really good relationship to, a business expert, you know, is very open-minded and you have a good connection. So that is the circle of direct influence. And you can easily introduce it to these people. The second circle is the indirect circle, which, you know, like product owner, your lead, you know, think people that are already further away from your direct influence. And then of course, and we often forget that, I often forget that, I'll put it that way, is that there is also a circle of no influence. And if you try to talk these people into, you know, having a look at DDD or trying out an experiment that you want to do, and then it won't have much effect because those people are out of your circle. So if you want to introduce it into a company, it's really helpful to think who are the right people. You know, sort of, can I convince one team member and then we both can sort of go to the team with this? Like, how can I do this? So it's very interesting to think about that, because I often did it wrong. So I thought this would be good if we put everyone on the board, and then we can sort of see that not everyone, like the CTO, might be in our circle of influences. Does anyone have any questions about that?
Bet John Connolly has questions. He sends me lots of questions on LinkedIn all the time. You there, John?
I have plenty of questions.
Let's have some. I gave you all mine last week.
Answers. That's why I keep asking Nick all the questions.
What questions do you have?
I think a question that I have, you know, what are our expectations going into this conversation, right? Between the person selling the idea and the person that might need the idea. What are our expectations? I think over the years, as I've been looking at this, the question that always comes up in my mind is, what is the problem that the other person is trying to solve? Early on, what is the problem I'm trying to solve? But what is the problem that the other person that I'm trying to speak with, what is their objective, you know? And I think that question of what is their objective helps to determine whether or not they're actually an audience member for the message that I'm trying to give.
Yeah, it's a really good. And you might change, like, you know, you might have different challenges because there are different people, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the question I have is how do we find the people who can quickly and immediately sense the felt need for the solutions that DDD provides? You know, in the green list down below, you know, I think of this, you know, there are certain people in that list that tend to have been distanced from the problems that, you know, the solution can solve. And so the question, I guess the question is, you know, the question I have is, how do you rack and stack, or how do you rank the general appeal? I mean, the development manager is always trying to get stuff done. And I think they, you know, there's a clouded view of what does getting things done look like. You know, the definition of done, I feel like that plays a role in identifying your audience. Are they defining completeness as the software works today, or are they defining it as that's something we can maintain for the future? You know, and so I wonder if the attributes on these various audience types might start to lead down the path that you're further down the path that you're starting.
All right. So one of the things to avoid, basically, if I can summarize, is that is not thinking about the other person, but just thinking of the problems it solves for you, and not thinking about the problems it solves for the other people who will have to use it. Is a don't.
An empathetic view of this process.
Yeah. Empathy is most definitely a challenge. It's not always easy for me. I don't know how other people feel about that.
It's a tough hill to climb.
Yeah. So that is why we have the second activity. I will summon everyone to me again. It's very fun to see all those arrows happen, by the way. So the second activity is basically we're going to do sort of again an individual brainstorm of the challenges that you have encountered when trying to introduce DDD. And then, of course, with those challenges, you also have things that you can try out, you know, and things that you should avoid. Like, I tried this and it worked really well. An example of something I did is that we introduced in a functional programming language, basically value objects. I didn't call them that at all. We just said we would introduce discriminated unions, single discriminated unions, because we were having trouble with the IDs, which basically meant that we were introducing value objects, but I didn't use those terms, and that is why it was perceived very good. And things to avoid, like something I have been doing very often, is having hours of a discussion as to why I'm interested in this and why everyone should be interested in this, instead of you know, just doing baby steps bit by bit.
So could you clarify those for me? So challenges faced by newcomers is, I'm new to DDD. What are the challenges I will face? Without stepping into the problem, what are the challenges I will face? Like, people will be against the idea. I might make a mistake trying to implement this idea, for example.
Yeah, you know, they're not excuses. They're often also valid, and they need to be addressed. Like, I don't think we have time to do this, or this will slow us down enormously, okay. Or it's too big, right? So
these are objections you might get from people. Yeah. You might get objections to your idea.
Yes, and okay. I don't want to call them objections. I want to call them challenges, because people have those objections, and they should be heard and they should be acknowledged.
Sure,
So we
but
don't want to brush
in
away
the
objections.
category of challenges, objections is just one type, right? Another challenge might be, I like the idea, I'm just too nervous to try it.
Exactly. Or the learning curve is just,
Or I'm not sure what these concepts mean. So what about things to try? This is, I've done DDD before. I know some things that work. I think you should try these things. Things to avoid is obviously, if you do these things when you're introducing DDD, you're probably going to have some negative outcomes.
Yeah.
We recommend you don't try these.
Yeah, like this is something I tried and I noticed it didn't really work well in my team. So we're going to, this is another individual exercise. I'm going to give you a bit of time to start writing down. Some of you already started writing things down. This is excellent. Don't worry about duplication. In the exercise after this, we'll sort of add a bit more structure to the chaos that we're creating right now. So, start writing down challenges and suggestions for people, whether they be good ones or things you tried and didn't work out. Are there any questions left about this exercise? All right. Okay, I keep missing. I keep pressing the wrong button. All right, I'm seeing a lot of good things in the challenges already. Don't forget to put some things in the suggestions for people as well. And don't forget to tell the things you tried and didn't work that great. All right. So we have some nice stuff on the board. We're going to walk through it a bit. If you're in a position to, turn on your webcam to make it a bit more cozy, so I can see you while we're talking, that would be nice too. If you're not, if your internet connection is bad or something like that, that's fine. So we'll start in the top right. Someone wrote down that one of the challenges was the learning curve for the team.
That was me. It was more of an objection than a problem. I felt that, and it combines with a few others, that they're not willing to spend time to get to understand the benefits behind DDD, get to understand the what it can do for you, and maybe offset the issues that they have. I've recently gone through this. That's why I've got so many.
No, that's great. If you do it, then you have awesome advice to give to people. Okay, and the other ones are all. So I'm assuming the left top corner is yours.
Yes.
Okay. Any stories you would like to share about that? You said like junior team may not be able to implement it correctly.
Again, another objection. Convincing to people to try and to spend the time to try and understand it. Because without that, being a newbie to DDD is really difficult to do it justice to the point where you can explain all of the benefits, in a short session. So yeah, that was my story, and it ended up being a serverless environment. So they felt that they didn't really want to use DDD because it may have been, may have affected their functions development or Lambda development or whatever the case may be. So it was more functional environment. That was just my experience.
Does anyone else has a similar experience they would like to share with trying to introduce it and it was just seemed too difficult for anyone?
I just don't get it. What has the technological solution has to do with DDD or not? This comparison serverless versus DDD.
Exactly.
What?
So I think that's quite a good one. It's about misconceptions, and domain-driven design has notoriously been a very difficult concept to define. There are many definitions out there. So that's definitely at the core of many people's challenges. If there was a clear definition of what domain-driven design was, then many of these challenges wouldn't be so difficult.
Yeah.
All right. Someone wrote down, do I understand this well enough to move another step forward?
That one was mine. I spent probably a good part of 3 or 4 years just trying to wrap my head around understanding domain-driven design, understanding the domain, and then figuring out which steps I'm going to actually implement in the real world. And so as a newcomer, one of the challenges is just myself. Do I actually understand how the strategy, the tactics are actually, how do I wield that sword? Do I really know how to do that?
Yeah, no.
And well enough to explain it to somebody else. This is why I'm doing this.
Yeah, it's often it's also a bit with self-doubt, I think. Like you don't know it well enough to believe that you can sort of share this with other people. Because we have this feeling that we have to be experts in order to sort of introduce this somewhere. I hope that one of the things that comes out of this is that the conclusion that we do not have to be experts at all in order to introduce this. And if you talk from your knowledge level, then people could also be interested in this. Like, I don't know what it is. Would you like to help this, discover with me or something like that? The way you talk about it.
That became my go-to is, hey, I don't really know how this works as a bounded context, or I don't understand this. I don't even know what ubiquitous language we would be speaking here, or or what even the term ubiquitous language means. So can we work together to figure out how to solve this problem at a higher and better level?
Right. So no project in my pipeline that would benefit easily. Is that something that, I don't know who wrote this down?
That was mine as well. I've run into this challenge with quite a number of people. Like I get DDD, I get people will say, I get DDD, even though they don't really get DDD. But the immediate defense is there isn't a project I want, as a manager or as a director, or as a CTO, CIO. I don't really want this mindset interfering with the productive process of these projects, because it could slow it down. And there isn't anything that I see in my pipeline right now that I would want you to start experimenting with on DDD right now.
Well, that's actually quite a valid problem, I would say. And it's
True.
Something that we should think about. So our mutual friend, James Morecambe, we were working on a project together once. And I remember the manager was saying, oh no, James has started doing all that DDD stuff with invariants and everything. And I don't think we did too much, but there was a chance we could have done too much for sure. So I think choosing the right time is important. And if someone does say, I don't think we have time for this right now, there could be something useful to take away from that. Maybe their sense of urgency is valid, or maybe it's not. That's something you'll have to try and work out. And actually, DDD can help you work out if it's a real sense of urgency or not.
Right. But it is definitely a challenge, not just even for newcomers. I think it's a challenge for the rest of your career to figure out when and where this should be implemented. But it definitely happens, pretty strongly at the newcomer level.
I think some of the arguments and the questions that you need to answer when you're proposing something like DDD to a dev team or to a CTO or to a dev manager, sometimes you just don't have the answers. And they're already going, yeah, well, you can't even explain it. How are we going to implement it? So yeah, there's that aspect of it as well.
What just came in my mind, because of the story of your John and Nick, the question is, what is your motivation to introduce DDD? If I am in a company and I am not a consulting, but this is a product what I'm building with the company, then I have a motivation because it is my working environment. But what is your motivation if you have projects and you're...
Well, mine and James's motivation on the project I was talking about was we just wanted to write the best code possible. Like, we were always discussing what's the best pattern to use here? How should we structure this code? How should we name things? Just a sense of pride to produce the highest quality software possible. I'd say professionalism, but that sense of professionalism can sometimes be misplaced.
Yeah.
If getting things done a bit more quickly is the way to go.
Yeah, over time, mine has become a matter of software economics. Is it economical? And the weight on doing things the current way versus switching gears and trying something new, for me, always lands on, is it worth it? In the long run, what is that risk? And so writing great quality code is software economical if that code has to be maintained for the long haul, right? You want to be able to actually go back and read it 6 months or a year later and make changes pretty rapidly for market introduction of new features.
Yeah, but there's a couple of things I want to say here. Got a couple of opinions coming your way just about right now. So the first one is Martin Fowler has written an article about code quality. And I think they looked at some studies, and what they found is taking the time to write code properly, you can shortcut for about, I think it was like 2 weeks to a month. And if you start hacking code for any more than a month, it's already uneconomical. You're already into negative at that point. He wrote an article, talks about code craft. I forgot the other point now. I've lost that other opinion.
Oh, it'll come back.
Yeah, it will come back. It will come back with 5 more as well. So don't you worry.
I'm not worried at all.
Because this is the question: quality and versus time versus startup time to market. What is the quality which it has to be, and when? This is my question before too. We discussed whom we want to convince or want to get on our side, but we didn't discuss when. Is this the right time? Is this a problem what I have and maybe not nobody else? So I cannot convince nobody. I cannot convince anybody because it is not a real problem. I just want to have DDD because I know it's better. But if it's not a real economical problem, or I cannot see a real problem, then it could be the wrong time. If this quality, it's good, but it's not the best, because there is nothing like the best, I think. How high must be this quality, and how is this balance? How we find this balance between introducing DDD, because this is a long time win and not a short time win, but not investing months and years so that economically we still can survive?
I would say economically, the argument is very clear. In software development, we spend way more time reading and changing code than writing code. And domain-driven design is about understanding the domain you work in and minimizing the code you write and making it easier to make changes to the code. So if you could prove like domain-driven design, it would sell itself. We just can't prove this. Like people still focus on let's write things quickly. We're focused on making it easier to read and change things over time.
Your example was exactly against this. Your client said, no, we don't want it because it takes too long.
There's a project I'm on right now. A previous developer was on the first version of the project, tons of spaghetti code, plenty of marinara sauce. It was horrible. And he's on this project now, but as a consultant. And we went through the event storming process. We found all of the illogical streams of code. We brought it down to about maybe 25 or 30% of the original code base. It has the same features. It just does it in a much more straightforward fashion. It's far more organized. It's been done very quickly. And he sees the night and day, the proof that Nick's talking about. There were bugs that he had to solve in the old program that took months to solve versus minutes or hours of researching and understanding and being able to implement a feature in the new code base. And his anecdotal, I guess, story becomes very important to the vice president of development, who trusts his judgment from the old code versus the new code. And the VP hired me because it has taken them months to solve problems in those code bases. And I sold him on the idea that economically, you don't want one superhero coder that can do all the things. You want 10 developers to be able to all work very efficiently in the software development space so that you can get things done faster. And you can't do that without organized code, and you can't get organized code without a paradigm. And the only paradigm I know for well-organized code is DDD. And so It was a matter of economics for maintenance, like Nick was saying, that made all the difference in the sales process.
Okay, perfect. I think we are done.
Okay.
All of the the challenges that we heard so far are very focused on the code. There are many other people, as we saw with the personas, that actually benefit from introducing DDD into a company. Like a question I have, if you are a product person, how can you prove that bad design is already happening? Does the person who wrote that down want to talk about it a bit? I don't know who wrote it down.
Yeah, I wrote that.
Hi.
I just think if you're working in the product side and you are trying to convince people who are also more on the product side, but their management, so it's classed as their product or their area of the business, how can you really show them that bad design is happening in the first place for you to need a better approach, such as domain-driven design? I don't think this is easy if you're not a developer or an architect. And whilst you can get those people on side to help you show it, I still think it's quite difficult to really prove that bad design is happening in the first place.
I never would go for bad design is happening because you don't know all the ideas, but you surely can show a better way. And this can be proven by time, how long it takes to fix a bug, months or hours, how long it takes to change some business requirements because they are changing all the time.
But you already have to commit to doing domain-driven design for that to happen.
No.
If you're a newcomer and you're trying to prove that this is something that is worthwhile, that's difficult. If you're if everything runs fine, then how can you say that actually we need to improve?
So what's the definition of runs fine? If a bug takes 4 months to repair, diseases have symptoms, right? I mean, that's the point.
Mostly.
Most of the time. One of the things that's very challenging, Nick and I have talked about this a little bit, is, and I've asked some giants in the industry this question: to get spaghetti code exposed and repaired and refined to a place where we're not doing that anymore. What is it going to take? In a different world, in the restaurant world, you have Gordon Ramsay who comes in and shames a restaurant into how bad their refrigerator is and how bad their food is and how bad their cooking processes are. And he has to shame them first because they're working in that every day and they don't even see the problem, right? They don't smell the bad food. They don't taste the bad food. They don't even want to admit that they don't have any customers coming into their restaurant. And so he comes in and he does this full-on remodel, but the very first thing he has to do is wake them up to the symptoms. And I think it's very interesting in talking with some pretty prominent people in the industry. When I say there's no consensus on how to design software, they say, oh no, there's perfect consensus. We do things like this and we do things like that. And we use XP and we use this. And my thought is, if there's great success in the consensus of how to design software, then why is the large amount of software that we encounter not very well designed? If the symptom is there, the symptoms of the disease is there, but we're ignoring it. And I think we need to open our eyes and have a way, tools possibly like Adam Tornhill's, code scene and other things like that can show us, hey, this actually is costing us money. This is actually horribly written code, and there is a solution to that. And I think that's the part of the thing that I think the industry is starting to get into, is how to define what is a poor design, that we don't even know what design is in a lot of the sectors of our industry. What is design? Much less what is a poor design and what is a good design. So I think that's part of the separating of the definition of concerns.
Lots of companies think things are fine, and then suddenly, oh no, Amazon's in my market and they're going to destroy us. We need to make massive changes very quickly.
Go for it.
Another thing that is everything's fine. You get in a room and do some event storming, and suddenly all the problems come out.
Right.
All the problems come out in an event storming workshop. For example, I was working with a fintech company doing this event storming a few years ago. And I was asking the developer, so what does that metric, they had a special metric. And I said, what does that metric mean? And he said, oh, it's calculated in this way and blah, blah, blah. And the head of marketing said, oh, no, it doesn't quite mean that. It means something else. And the developer says, well, since I wrote the code, I can tell you for 100% it works that way. I'm just going to get my laptop and check it anyway. He's like, yeah, definitely works that way. And so the marketing manager was very shocked in that moment. And actually, she then said to the group, oh, now it all makes sense why the numbers don't match up in our advertising campaigns. And then she was kind of a bit, she was happy, but she was upset. And I think she left the workshop at that point. So yeah, I mean, things might be okay in some companies. Sometimes there's a facade and people are just smiling when it's not okay. And once you give people a chance to express how they really feel, things might come out. We also have the accelerate metrics. Like, how can you measure a good company? How often do you deploy? How quickly can you take a piece of code from your machine, push it to master branch and have it in production? Like, these metrics are becoming more prominent now. And like John said about Adam Thornhill's, what does he call it? Is it code scene?
Code scene, yeah.
Yeah, so we are moving in that direction. We definitely will be much closer in 20 years, I'm sure. Much less than 20 years, but we'll start to have models of how do you evaluate a piece of system of software to define what does good look like. And we have things like that now already, right? With dependencies, levels of nesting.
Cyclomatic complexity, things have been around for years that we don't really pay attention to very often, right? In a normal shop. So
but maybe to answer the question, again, you should not, I wouldn't say something is bad because I don't know, I'm not so deep in this situation, but showing another way, organizing an event storming, or only discussing about this new kind of stuff like DDD, which means using the same language, building features, not technically described, but like business described, just showing and doing it, and finding other fellows who are open for this. I would go this way and not saying what you are doing is wrong.
right.
Because it doesn't help. What
No, it
helps
doesn't.
is just going forward and showing new ways and visualizing everything what you can. Then you can show, look, it takes 10 months to deploy something, or I don't know, we have a new business issue and we are not able to implement it because the code is not structured by the business, but by databases or whatever. Just showing good examples and good ways out of the mess.
Yeah, and there are lots of small things you can do. And this is typically what I'll do on most projects. There are like small things like, I don't understand this part of the domain. Could we try an event storming? Could you explain it to me? Like you're saying, can you explain this to me? And can we use post-its using events? And then suddenly when you start asking these questions, the domain experts will realize that, oh, it's more complex than they thought, or things aren't clear to the developers, and they will see the value in this collaboration. You can scale it from there. You can do things on a tactical level in the code, like, oh, we have the same name. We have two different names for this thing. Why don't we create one name to make it clear. Like you might call it, I don't know, an account in one place and a registration in another place. Like why these two things mean the same? Let's just give it the same name. So I think after this workshop, we should, one of the outcomes should be, what are the small things you can do? Here's 100 small things you can do to get the benefits of DDD without having to sell DDD, and it's very low risk to try it. Yeah, I think that would be a good outcome.
Right. So talking about the outcome, it's time for activity 3, which is basically where we are going to work towards what Nick wants, which is you have a challenge and you have a lot of things that you could try out and things that you should probably avoid doing. So basically I called it the mix and match of challenges with suggestions. Some advice works for multiple challenges. So I'll share my screen quickly to show the board. I hope this is working. It's always confusing with 2 monitors.
I see your screen.
Excellent. So what we have here is activity number 3, mix and match challenges with suggestions. So as you can see, we copied during the discussion that we were having, we already copied the chaos of exercise 2 onto the group board. So every board has a number and you will be divided into groups. We have 6 groups. In the chat, you will find a link to your board. So when you know which group you are in, you can open the board. You can add your names, to introduce yourselves a bit, because it's not because, we're virtual. We don't have to be polite. So, let people know who you are. And then basically you pick a couple of challenges that you find interesting, and you try to come up with things that you can try and things that you should avoid for that specific challenge. And what you end up with is these clusters of a challenge with do's and don'ts that fit well for this specific challenge. So I'm going to open the rooms, but before I do that, are there any questions left? Is it clear what we're trying to achieve with this exercise?
I have a question about how will the challenges be distributed for each group? And will we be able to pick it, or will it somehow be given to us per group?
So all the challenges that people wrote down are here. You can pick a few that you can have a few minutes to discuss which challenges seemed most interesting. Another thing that you can do is pick all the challenges and sort of group the ones that are similar, because this was a brainstorm. There's sort of might be duplicates, and sort of group them into a larger concept, and then starting from that larger concept, you add things that could work, things that people should try, or things that people should avoid, and things that most definitely don't work. For example, that's one way to do it. Or you just pick the first one you encounter, or there was a discussion here and you thought you heard some interesting ones and you just pick those off the board. Depends on what the group really feels like doing. Does that answer your question? Is it more clear? All right.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
I would say, don't worry if you don't. We're not expecting you to have answers for all of the challenges, so don't worry too much about that. After this workshop, the board will be made public, the main board, not the group boards with your names on. We'll take your names off. And so if you want to continue after the workshop, it will all be available. You can continue. If you have a challenge this evening that doesn't get answers, you can ask us afterwards and we'll come back to those. And we'll also have people who couldn't attend this evening giving their advice for these challenges. So tonight is very much like the first iteration of this getting started guide for DDD newcomers, and it will just be continuously evolving from today. It will be a repo on GitHub. So if ever you have a challenge or an idea or a suggestion, there's always going to be a chance to share that.
All right, then I will open all rooms. Casper, are you still here? Yeah, for the live stream, to join a room. Can we force him somehow? Hi, Ashish. I'm going to assign you to group 1 for the exercise. Hello. I can see that someone's trying to talk to me, but I can't hear you. Daniel? Hi, Ahmed. I can assign you to a different group if nothing is happening in yours, if you're interested. Hi, Ahmed. Do you want to be reassigned to a group?
I think that would be good because I am just starting.
Okay.
Yeah.
So group 1.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll put you both in group 1 and you can join them.
We were in the middle.
Christina, you're on mute, I think.
No, I'm not.
I can't hear you.
We were in middle in
Me?
argumenting. You don't hear me? I hear you.
Maybe it's my speaker.
It's your
I hear you,
speaker.
Christina.
I can hear you, Christina.
I hear
Seems
you
to be
too.
me.
Are you not hearing anyone?
Hello.
Hello,
Everybody now.
Yeah.
Nick.
Nick. I'm gonna send him a
That's
message.
it.
He's left the
I
building.
changed my settings by mistake.
There you go. Can you hear us now?
I can hear you. And I want to hear lots more of you, John. Tell me something exciting you were speaking about.
No. So we actually had a good conversation in this group
It was very good, but we were thrown out.
very quickly. We could have gone for hours.
All right. Why don't you summarize it in 2 or 3 minutes?
Well, one of the very first challenge we talked about was how does a non-technical person approach DDD, and we Javier talked about the fact that there's a prime opportunity for really honing in on the ubiquitous language and being really a student of defining the business in a ubiquitous language and being a help to developers in that way.
So have you seen what Sophia Herendi does? So Sophie is a product manager. She works for IBM. She is very passionate about helping the development team she works with to apply DDD. And she uses the concept of a domain quiz to help them learn the domain and the language. So she gives
domain quiz. That's neat.
She gives them a quiz with some questions about the domain, and then she gives them the answers to it at the same time. So then they have no excuse for coming to the quiz and not knowing the right answer. So the quiz is just a decoy to make them do their homework.
No pressure.
But actually, we did the quiz. So we did the quiz in our workshop last week. We put an event storm on a Miro board, or a model of the domain. It wasn't an event storm. And we had a domain quiz. And we just asked people, by looking at the domain model, can you answer these questions?
Nice.
Obviously, there are some challenges with the quiz, though, because if you say to some people, I want you to do a quiz about the domain, they might not take it so well. So you might want to check out some of Sophie's tips for doing it in like a stealth way. Nice. I think she positions it along the lines of, I need to know what you understand so I can explain things in more detail where you don't understand them. You kind of make it for you and not them.
Right.
And it is in a way, it is for you in a way.
Yeah.
Actually, the second question was much more interesting, where we were interrupted.
Well, and so I'll just finish the last piece of that. The non-technical person can do the quiz. They can do event storming to some degree, learn how to really help the business define its flow, and champion. I had put down a champion a business definition of done, so that the eye is always on solving a business problem and not just completing code, but that this actually does, that concrete examples are actually working in the software, and the business definition of done is something that kind of flows out of that ubiquitous language. I'll let Christina do the next part if she wants to.
Again?
Go ahead. You're up.
I lost. I was sharing Twitter names. So exactly, the most important part is one can be confident about one must be confident about the benefits. Why even would we think about DDD? If I know the benefits, and this is easy to learn and to understand, why else would I want to make to use DDD? Then I must be confident this one. And the rest is the team. I need a team who is willing to go on a journey, who is willing to see these possibilities where we can go, who is willing to change, which is willing to change. And then it's the most easiest part. I just explain the benefits, how we could come there, starting with small changes, starting with constraints, starting with some guides, and how we come there. And the rest is not so hard. I don't have to learn a totally new language, or I don't have to do event sourcing. I just have to understand on what journey we can go and how fast it can help if the business is changing and I need to make a new feature or a behavior, and I am able to do it because I follow the business and not the technical constraints.
So what was this challenge you were discussing? What did you put on the card? How did you label it?
You can see the board. Wait. Oh, it's a very long one. How to speak with confidence, authority about DDD when I feel like I know nothing about DDD.
Okay. And do we feel like this is correct? Should you have to feel confident? What was your feeling there? Did you agree that you should feel confident when you introduce it?
My point was that you don't have to be to know everything about DDD. You just have to know about everything about the benefits of DDD.
But this to me implies we're selling DDD as a whole thing, and it's all or nothing. For me, I can take small bits and pieces and try this and try this. Yeah. Do a very small event storm. I can do a bit of refactoring to value objects.
This is the answer. You don't have to go all in. You have the benefits, you have a goal and a journey.
So we take some parts, we find the benefit of that small piece, and that's how we can be confident, right? If we take a small practice like value objects or event storming, and we practice it in a small setting, we can become confident about a small thing quite quickly.
Yeah, we had another post-it called make some experiments, like this one.
Yeah, make some experiments.
Yeah.
Did you have any examples of experiments you would use?
We didn't have time anymore.
All right.
Stop rubbing it in that I called you. Something you said though sparked my interest. It says that you need to know your benefits and you need to have a motivated team. Do you feel like there's a minimum requirement in order to try to introduce domain-driven design into your company? What if you do not have a motivated team behind you and you're not quite sure of the benefits? How would you respond to that person?
This was my question. What is your motivation? What was your motivation, John, Nick, to introduce, or everybody here? What is the motivation to solve this problem?
I think it's multi-layered, if I were to be honest. There's a personal desire not to work so hard at software when it shouldn't be that hard. That's one. But primarily, like I said before, the clients that I work with, I want them to have to feel an economical benefit to doing DDD. I want them to sense that. I want them to feel like software is a tool that their business is benefiting from, and not a challenge that's preventing them from gaining market share or from getting out there in the business. So in the world that I live in, the motivations are very plentiful. But if I were just a straight up developer and I just wanted to introduce this to my company and I didn't have any other purpose at all, I would be like, I want to do like Nick was saying, I want to be the best professional developer I can be. And this is a journey for me. I'm learning and I want to grow, and my my ability to produce solutions quicker that are more maintainable. And this is an opportunity to grow.
So if you think about the motivation, right, just think about microservices. Everyone went crazy about microservices because what did they want? They wanted loosely coupled software systems, teams that were independent, and software that was easy to change.
Right.
That's exactly what the purpose of domain-driven design is: loosely coupled software systems which are easy to change with independent teams. The reason microservices wasn't successful was because it focused too much on the technical things and the size of things, and not actually the design aspect. So people actually want the benefits of design. Everybody wants a loosely coupled systems.
That's right.
They just haven't been able to connect the dots and realize that in order to create loosely coupled software systems, you need to understand the domain.
I think to have some level of confidence is important, but I think to have a lot of humility in the learning process is more important. Like, I don't think I would get much traction if I really sounded like I knew it all.
Exactly right. Then yeah,
But
you have to learn together. You cannot know. You have to learn the domain. You cannot know everything.
But I do think you'd have to have some idea, like what Nick was saying. Why are we doing this? So domain-driven design, if you don't have a concept of what domain is or what design is, how can you drive towards a design from the domain? I mean, you kind of need to know a little bit about that to be able to move forward at the very beginning. So there is a starting point on the journey, I think.
So I think that's another outcome from this workshop. I think what we can do is we can try and create a definition somewhere of what is the benefit of DDD. How can I explain this in a clear way? It's not going to be covering everything, but if we all work together on this, we can get a lot of different perspectives and we can collectively come to some definition of what are the benefits of DDD? How do we explain it? And I think that can be a starting point for people, right? If I want to be confident, I know what something is. If there's a definition I can look at, and we know that many people have worked on this, this is an agreed definition. I know that, well, what I'm saying is correct because this is the agreed upon definition of something. Like, I think at the moment, if you wanted to be confident, do I know what a core domain is, for example, or do I know what a bounded context is, for example? You could read a lot of stuff about DDD. You could get a lot of different opinions about what these things mean, and you could be less confident because you're just not sure which of these things is the correct definition. Whereas if we were to create a more precise definition with examples, people could be much more confident that, okay, I've read this thing. I don't fully understand it yet, but I know roughly the key benefits of this thing and what one is and what one isn't.
Yep.
Sounds like we're driving towards a manifesto.
No.
I don't think a manifesto, just a why DDD. What is it and what are the benefits?
I'm just being humorous, Nick. I knew.
Okay. Yeah, it got lost coming across the Atlantic somewhere.
Yeah, there was too much water between us.
It does, however, bring up something interesting that I have noticed, and is that like a manifesto makes it sound elite. And I have often gotten that sort of feedback from people, right? That it seems, elite, that, you have to be part of it and stuff like that. Did anyone have similar experiences, similar challenges?
Yeah, manifestos also become very immutable, let's say.
It's a manifesto. It's the word is immutable.
Okay,
and I would say very misunderstood and misapplied over time.
I said in the chat that it's a common perception that people view domain-driven design as something that is for the elite. If I understood your comment correctly, of course. And I have the same feeling. Like, people say, like, well, it's like this exclusive group that wants to be hip, and You know, I've actually watched talks that mention this over and over again, like why DDD is not good and why it's just elitist.
Wow.
No, okay. I thought you were talking about the word manifesto.
You might not
No, I
agree.
never heard this, but I never I never watch talks like this. Why are you doing this?
Um,
Don't have this experience.
why? Because you can't ignore that kind of feedback.
Sure, it was a joke.
I
There's-
think there's a good comment here from Carol in the chat, which is every beautiful idea can and will be misinterpreted and abused. And we've had this conversation a lot recently. Like, we're trying to put some information out there to make it easier to apply DDD. At the same time, we have to be very careful that we don't oversimplify things. And, you know, people turn DDD into a set of steps you follow and that's it. Like a checklist of items. We're very careful not to do that. No, what we're trying to say is domain-driven design is ultimately about collaborative design. It's about thinking about the way we structure, name things, how things talk to each other. It's
How
about
we talk to each other. How we work.
yeah, and how people talk to each other. It's effectively like John keeps saying, it's if you look at the economics of software development with DDD, it's about trying to do the things that we believe will have the maximum economic impact, let's say. It's about spending as much time learning about the domain as is necessary in order to write the simplest code that solves the purpose and can be easily changed over time.
The thing that struck me the most, I did sit through, I don't know how many of you have sat through the 4-day immersion course that Eric teaches. Last year, he taught it with Paul Rayner. And the thing that struck me the most about every hour of that education was the fact that all of the decisions that were being made were an attempt to create a more economical solution. So you would not be doing certain aspects of DDD in certain situations versus others. And you definitely are designing a solution, even if you're saying that this is not core, you're designing this out of the core, you're designing this into the core. And when it's in the core, you're designing these aggregates and the nature of design, the motivation of the design had always seemed to me in those 4 days was to benefit the company the most economically, to give them the biggest bang for their buck. And it wasn't just about beautiful code or, it wasn't about artwork. It wasn't about painting the Sistine Chapel. It was about, industrially painting, the airport complex. It was about doing the right job at the right time for the right reasons. And so design has gotten lost, I think, and nobody has said the A word yet, but in talking with one of the signers of that manifesto, I asked that question: where did design go when we got this paradigm? And that was a very big unanswered question. I don't know what happened. Why are people on the hamster wheel of features and not doing the design work that's required to sustain those features? And I think there's an educational process that's missing. And I think as a developer for many years, I didn't know how important design was. I thought I was just supposed to do my JIRA tickets, So I think when we talk about defining what DDD is, it goes bigger than just how to make an aggregate or how to model a thing. It's about the importance of design in the first place. And I think if we don't approach that in this exercise, then we will continue to see the falling down of the reason why you would do DDD in the first place.
All right.
Great speech, John. Great speech. That definitely traveled across the water perfectly.
Okay,
we need
well,
to focus on the economics, definitely.
I'm off my soapbox now.
Yeah. Does anyone else have anything other they wanted to talk about? still, me and John have stolen the show a bit. I think it's time for someone else to share some stuff.
Legal persona. We had at the start, you said on the board, somebody put the legal department as the person to convince. And we should hear this story.
Yeah, we have, we've got like, let's say 5 or 10 more minutes. We've got a couple more. I think the legal one would be good if whoever put that ticket is here. You can type in the chat if you're not able to speak on your microphone. All right, we'll have to leave that one. Does anyone else have a challenge that they wanted to get answers for tonight and they haven't got answers yet? Maybe someone who's currently at a hurdle and there's something they'd like to try and do tomorrow, but they don't quite have the confidence yet. Anything very actionable and specific you'd like to get some advice on?
Would be good to know like how to get the conversation started. Once you got the people on the room like to, okay, let's try this. How do you get that conversation flowing? Do you need to like have some samples of like a main event that you want to explore? Or do you go like, okay, this is our program, how can we do this? Or what do you be like that? What is a good point to start a conversation?
Yeah, I always find the collaborative techniques are usually a good conversation starter, kind of like we talked about earlier. So something like event storming or example mapping from BDD, where you get the domain experts and the people who write the software together, and you try and model the domain on a whiteboard. And what nearly always happens if these meetings go well is that people see the benefit of collaboration. The domain experts may realize, oh, I didn't realize how poor the developer's understanding was here. Or they may enjoy when the developers start asking questions. And you may get to a point where the developers say, oh, I didn't realize this process worked this way for that reason. We could achieve something much simpler in software. Now I know the real goal of this. So I depending on the goals, if you're just working in a team and you want to introduce DDD and you don't have any big projects in mind, I think that can be a good way to start with a collaborative workshop. I would make it maybe just 1 hour or even half an hour, just something small and low key, a small experiment basically. And I wouldn't even talk about domain-driven design at that point, unless there was already some motivation in the company to try that.
Oh, good. I'll try those.
So one thing I did, which was very helpful, was so I work remote, and once in a while I go to visit America. So I'm not very often with my business experts. So I said, like, since our time together is very valuable, and I actually don't, have a really bigger picture of how all departments interact with each other and how this all works. Could we sort of like just write it all down? And sort of, pick the departments and then sort of say how they interconnect with each other. So basically that was the first thing we did. I invited a whole bunch of people and we ended up with a very, very big overview of how all the departments interconnected with each other. Because, it's a startup, so they change quite often because they notice that a department gets too big and I didn't know how it worked anymore. And everyone was very enthusiastic because it was the first one that anyone ever bothered to map out the bigger picture. And it was just a bunch of Post-its and some, pens and one person willing to do a lot of meeting schedules with every department to make sure that everyone had a say. in how everything interconnected and how they felt it interconnected. And they were very enthusiastic about that. And that was very small to start. And I never mentioned domain-driven design.
Good one also.
We have a question there, a hard one. How can the success be measured? Managers will ask for measurable output. Back to the Jira point.
Yeah, two ways to measure things. Obviously, one is with quantitative data. The other is qualitative. So quantitative can be harder to achieve, but I've seen companies doing this. So there's a company in the UK called Redgate Software. They build a whole set of tools for databases and related things, and they have automated in each team's continuous delivery pipeline the accelerate metrics. The accelerate metrics are how frequently do you deploy, how quickly does a code change go from your developer's laptop to production, how often do you have outages in production, and how quickly do you recover. And they have seen improvements in these metrics by applying certain practices. For example, they started mob programming and they saw their metrics improved. So I think other teams started to try mob programming and they saw similar improvements. The other thing you can do is create surveys and send out surveys and just ask people, how do you feel at the moment in your team? There's the Spotify health check, drink. There's the Spotify health check I recommend looking at, which is basically a bunch of questions like how do you feel in the team? How quickly can you make changes to the code? So you can have a questionnaire or a survey, which is how much do you think of this stuff is working, this domain modeling is working, and just get numbers that way.
And about the team too, a survey about how happy you are at work here, how is your team collaboration changed? Is better, or you don't need to ask about change, but you can see it on the numbers. The companies forgot they don't only have the software, they need the people. And if the people are starting to leave, this is how we introduced the first time DDD, because nobody wanted to work anymore in the spaghetti code. And we said we have to change something. And really, it was a two-way stuff. Either we leave or we change it. And the company didn't want that we leave to lose all the employees, so we started to change. And it was an extreme version, but to see how happy the happiness quote, well, something like this in the company, how happy are the developer to work there? Or not only the developer, sorry, the whole product team.
All right. Shall we call it an evening? Oh, yeah, I think we're just about out of time now. I know a few people have to leave. So thank you for coming. Thank you for setting all of this up, Heen.
Did you look on YouTube of if there are any questions?
I haven't been looking at YouTube, unfortunately.
Me neither.
Widely ignored YouTube.
Me too. And Casper is muted. Okay, then on Twitter.
Will there be a way to follow the progress of, as you mentioned earlier, this is just the beginning of this playbook that we're building? Will there be a place to measure, to follow the progress?
Yeah, so there will be a repository on GitHub. We already have some repositories for people who are new to DDD. It's github.com DDD-crew. I'll post a quick link in here.
There are no questions on YouTube.
It will be another repository in the DDD crew account on GitHub.
Thank you.
And we'll try to sort of pour everything here into the initial setup. And then we can go from there.
Yeah. And we put the link of the Miro board in Meetup?
Yeah, we'll put the meetup. We'll put a link to the Miro board in the meetup comments.
Or in GitHub too?
Yeah.
All right.
It would be cool to have your stories, John, there as in the section benefits and clear benefits. I mean, this story about reducing the code of 30% and reducing the time to fix bugs and in a very short time, it is a absolute best story. This is the answer how to measure it.
Yeah, I mean, every situation is going to be a little different, but hopefully you can find that common thread of what generally used to take this long now only takes this long, and it's significant by weeks, kind of a thing.
And it's not just about how quickly things take. It's also about identifying opportunities that weren't there before. So developers understanding the domain might lead to new product features, because they can blend the knowledge of technology, what's possible, with the domain business opportunities.
There is a bit of an unmeasurable sense of the logic works more like the business. Now we can do things more like the business.
Yeah. It's totally unmeasurable. You don't know what could have happened. This is like with DDD. DDD, I cannot prove that I have less bugs because who knows if it is very hard to prove. I think it comes to the collaboration. If the collaboration works, then is everybody happy and everybody understands that less turns to make, because we having the right solution for the start and not as only at the first or fourth try.
I don't want to give the impression that it's hopeless. I mean, the accelerate measurements are there and there are other things, but there are, coupled with that is a bundle of other things that are harder to measure. But sometimes an anecdotal story goes a long way, for some people. And I will put that up there. Just send me the link, Nick, wherever I need to be.
Cool. All right. I think it's that's the place where we can wrap it all up. Heen, any final thoughts?
I just want to thank you guys for letting me interrupt your situation over there in the UK for a minute. It was fun for the last couple hours. Good break from my normal day.
You're welcome.
You're welcome. No, that was it. Thank you all for coming. I've seen some very interesting questions. Some of them answered, some of them still open. So there's a lot of room for more. So thank you everyone for coming. And I hope we'll see you again from Spain, apparently. I saw someone.
Thanks very much for putting this on. It was great.
Yeah,
no problem.
Thank you.
And see you.
Bye-bye. See you guys.
Bye.
I hope you all get something in the hand and you have new information and new ideas. It was a great evening.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm going to stop the live stream now.